Hello, my name is Barry Schrader. I'm 75 years old. I live at Oakcrest Retirement Center in DeKalb. I'm a 5th-generation native of DeKalb County. I'd like to start out by telling you a little bit about my early life. I was born on a dairy farm south of Waterman. My folks, Margaret and Vernon Schrader, had farmed all their lives, and 3 generations of farmers before them. When I was about 3 years old, my father moved to a Babson farm over between Hinckley and Waterman. And so when I started school, my mother happened to be a teacher, had been a teacher in country schools around DeKalb County, and she had taken off school teaching while she was raising me. And when I was about 5 years old, they convinced her they needed a teacher in Salmonock. So she told the superintendent, Lewis Flynn, that she would come to teach if she could bring her 5-year-old child along, since there was no kindergarten and she didn't have any way of babysitting me. So at 5, I was taken over to Salmonock, and in her first grade class, so she was my first grade teacher. I went there 2 years, and then she changed teaching to Hinckley. We moved into Waterman, and my father had a heart attack in his late 40s and could no longer farm. And then he went into training to become an electrician, and my mother continued to teach. We moved to Waterman, where I spent a few more years in grade school. Then my folks decided, because my father's job had taken him up to Sycamore G&G Electric, that we should move up to the Genoa-Sycamore area. And they found an empty lot out in the country near the Kishwaukee River on Baseline Road, and began building a new home. They did most of the work themselves, and spent 2 years building that home. We moved up there, and then I started attending actually 1 year in Sycamore School District, because they hadn't moved the district boundary line yet. And after that, the bus picked me up for Genoa schools, and I went on from 6th grade through high school in Genoa-Kingston, and graduated there in 1958. My mother then continued to teach. She started teaching up there in Kingston, moved over to Genoa for another 10 years before she retired. And my father finished his career working at Automatic Electric, which originally was Like Electric in Genoa, as an electrician. After school, I went to NIU, like most of the students in this area before there was a community college system. I spent my 5 years at Northern, mostly as a Northern Star staffer, very little time spent studying or going to classes. That's why it took me 5 years to get through. As I talked to my good friend Jerry Smith in an interview that we did recently, my life centered around the Northern Star, journalism, and student activism. My time there was well spent. I really broadened my horizon from small town in Northern Illinois to learn so much about the world, because I mixed with the international students, became active in the International Student Association. In my junior year, decided to form an underground magazine called The Quarterback, along with 2 other students, Ralph Johnson and Wally Wold. And we attracted a staff of other activists and faculty members, including Dr. Earl Hader, Ken Owens, Walt Warnick, Hal Camp, and other faculty who also had, divergent opinions with the administration, and they helped us put this magazine out for the next 2 years until I was a senior. I also helped organize a group on campus called the Committee for Student Rights, which was making demands of the administration to improve their student relations and involve the students in governing more, give us more say through the Student Association, as well as better protect some of our minority groups that were not well treated in DeKalb at the time. So we called for such things as better student housing, no dorm hours for the girls, which were at 10 o'clock at that time, and also to improve housing opportunities for minority students, which were not being accepted in the community as they should. We had other demands, but anyway, it ended up with a protest demonstration on the Altgeld Hall lawn. It was now where Loudon Hall is located, and I was one of the students involved in that in leadership role there. My magazine efforts ended in 2 years because we could not afford to keep producing an underground student publication without money and advertising support. But I went back to the Northern Star, where I'd originally started, became their feature editor and circulation manager, earning $25 a week for each one of those jobs. and that helped finish my education. And meanwhile, I had moved into the Wesley Foundation house, which was on a 205 Normal Road next to the new Wesley Foundation Methodist Church, and spent the last 2 years of my schooling living there with 5 other fellows. That was also a wonderful experience. I had a wonderful mentor in Reverend Ron Russell, who was the pastor of that church and was very instrumental, I think, in forming my beliefs and my attitude, work ethic attitude, and also as an activist and for human rights, civil rights, mental health rights, things that I worked on later in my life. After school was over in '63, I got my first job as an editor of 3 weeklies up in Ogle County, Byron Tribune, Stillman Valley News, Leaf River Register. After a year working out, I saved money, got married to my wife, Kay Wersing. We lived up in Byron, raised $2,500 to buy my hometown weekly in Genoa, which is the Genoa Republican. This is the picture of the first day we took over the newspaper. Shows me with my eyes about half shut from a lack of sleep, and Kay with me in the front of the Genoa Republican building. So in the very tender young age of 24, I became an editor and publisher of my own newspaper. Paid $2,500 down. We owed a debt of $49,000 to the owners, C. Coleman Schoonmaker and Art Getman. Right after that, the Associated Publishers that had the papers up in Ogle County also owned the DeKalb County Journal. They called it at Kirkland, actually Kirkland Journal to most people. And they wanted to get rid of that paper because it was a money loser. So I bought that for the grand total sum of $2,500. Mainly got a subscription list out of that. And was looking forward to this Northern Route 72 paper business where I could also not only sell advertising, but a lot of printing that we did in our Genoa Republican printing plant. Meanwhile, a group in DeKalb, headed by John Castle, Attorney John Castle, and 3 of his closest, I call them business partners, associates, Phil Moriskowicz, Phil Schmidt, and then they added Sam Brody later as an investor. They wanted to form a newspaper corporation, and found me with 2 papers up in the northern part of the county, and they wanted to buy into my operation, so we formed DeKalb County Press. Their goal was to eventually, and I didn't know this at the time, to start their own daily up against the DeKalb Chronicle and compete to either taking over the Chronicle or running them out of business, I guess. So once they joined me in about '65, we tried to buy the Sycamore True Republican and Sycamore True Republican and the Sycamore Tribune from the George Dean family. They declined to sell to us, and so we started up a new newspaper in that town that was called the Sycamore Sun. I was the editor and publisher, and here's our first edition that came out of the Sycamore Sun. This was an effort to convince them that they should sell out. And after about 4 months of our paper being very successful, we distributed to every home in Sycamore and some of the rural area. The old True Republican Tribune people were down to about 2,000 circulation, and we circulated to about 4,000 in around the area. So they then decided to sell to us. So DeKalb County Press purchased the True Republican and the Tribune. We merged the Sun and the Tribune together to make it the Sun Tribune. Meanwhile, this corporation that I was a part of forming decided they wanted to take on the DeKalb Chronicle. I was being protective of the papers and that I had owned originally, not wanting them to be folded into a new paper. We had some major disagreements on the operations and how we should proceed, and I found myself out of a job. I thought I was the owner of the newspaper, but I didn't have majority of the stock. So when I found out that I no longer controlled these newspapers, that the corporation had taken over, I accepted a buyout and stepped out. This was in 1966, and here I was only 26 years old and looking for a job for the first time in my life. I went out to California because I visited the relatives out there in the past, and I thought that'd be a wonderful place to relocate. My wife had just had our first son, Todd, and we were obviously looking for a means of supporting the family. And so I went out and within 10 days found a job at the San Bernardino Sun out in California. Flew back home, picked up the family rental truck, and took all of our furniture out to San Bernardino and started life anew out there. My interest, though, was in becoming editor of a newspaper, and up in the San Francisco Bay Area, I had an editorship open on the Livermore Herald, later to become the Tri-Valley Herald, and I interviewed for that job after a year in San Bernardino and was hired as the editor of that paper, which was only about 12,000 circulation at that time. Anyway, make a long story short, I spent a year and a half as editor of that paper, and then the DeKalb Daily Chronicle was sold to the Scripps Hagedorn organization out of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and they were advertising for a new editor to take over from Bob Greenaway, Eddie Raymond, Chuck Raymond, who had sold the business and were stepping out. I came back and interviewed and was hired immediately, so brought the family back. My second son, Darren, had been born out in California, so he's the only native Californian in our family. But the family of four of us came back and began my new role as the editor of the Daily Chronicle, which we'd competed again as weeklies originally. And now I found myself competing with DeKalb County Press, which had been the old organization that I helped form 5 or 6 years before. The interesting story, I guess, in there is that Jerry Smith, who had been my colleague, had worked on the Northern Star with me at Northern, happened to be coming on board as the editor of the new DeKalb County Journal at the same time that I was moving back here to take over the Chronicle. So we found ourselves hitting head on as the two editors battling it out for the newspaper readers here in DeKalb County. This was a unique situation in that the Scripps Hagedorn organization had a lot of money behind them. They were about 15 newspapers nationwide. They had a real strong business organization. And so the DeKalb County Journal, which went daily about the time I came back, found themselves battling a well-entrenched organization that had a lot of money behind it. So the Journal did not get much advertising, and they never got more than like 5,000 circulation, and the Chronicle had 12,000 and over circulation at the time. So after 2 years of battling this out, the owners of the Chronicle bought out the DeKalb County Journal. Jerry Smith, fortunately, didn't lose his job over that. He and Ralph Sherman, the publisher, remained on because they had a large printing operation that did a lot of outside printing for Newsweek. Television programming. They did farm newspapers. They did magazines. So they had a very good, lucrative printing business. And when they sold their subscription list to the Chronicle, they stayed on. Unfortunately, 50 of their employees were laid off because the newspaper, of course, folded. The Chronicle kept going. I stayed on another year in the Chronicle. Then I had a good offer to go back to California to the Bay Area to be editor of a fairly new paper called the Valley Times in the Dublin, Pleasanton, Livermore area. And I had worked there before, so I knew the territory. So picked up my family, put them in a moving van again, went back to California. This was in 1972. And I was, again, found myself with a competitive newspaper situation because there were actually 3 papers in that immediate East Bay area that were competing head on. So I had gotten a lot of experience in competing on a day-to-day basis here in DeKalb and took that knowledge with me to my new job out in California. Well, stayed there 35 years. Stayed in the newspaper business about 10 years out there, and then found a more lucrative career in public relations. At the time that I was in Livermore, I actually resided there. 2 large laboratories who, they were both Department of Energy laboratories, Lawrence Livermore National Lab and Sandia National Labs, operated there with many thousands of employees. So I accepted a position in 1980 as head of public relations for Sandia National Labs. My sons were in junior high at that time, and I wanted to spend a little bit more time with them because the newspaper work had really eaten you up 7 days a week, taking a lot of my life. and I didn't have much time to spend with the family. Luckily, Kay was a good mother and was able to raise the boys pretty much when I was gone so much. Anyway, it was a good move for me because it turned out I stayed there 21 years. I became manager. I started out a public information officer, became manager of public affairs and employee communications for a 1,000 employee organization. Good benefits, good pay, gave me lots of time to do extracurricular activities. I became very active in service clubs. I became a Rotarian out there 30 years, as a matter of fact, president of my club. Held some district positions in Rotary. I also helped organize a new exchange club out there, which is very similar to Rotary, only it's on a smaller scale, and it's a U.S.-based organization. My experience with Exchange Club was not only to take over the presidency of the club, but also to organize a new club nearby. And when I became president of the Livermore Rotary Club, I also built a new Rotary Club in Livermore, so they had two, a morning club and a noon club. Then I got interested in writing a book about Livermore. So I put together a book that my wife and I actually had printed on my home letterpress in my garage. This is a little chapbook size book, and I was a hobby printer. I had taken up a hobby as working with antique type and also with old-fashioned printing presses, and I had a 1900 10 by 15 platen press that I used in my garage to print this book and print many other things. But as a hobby, I printed tickets for organizations and for churches, and I did bookmarks, I did raffle tickets, I did political brochures for friends. Meanwhile, as I was at Sandia Labs, I was very interested in the community college out there. We had an extension campus from the big Hayward-Chabot College campus, and found out that our local representative was not doing a good job in representing the particular valley, the constituency. So I was encouraged by people in the community to run for the college board. And I did that, and here's my brochure. When I ran the first time, I ran against a 20-year incumbent and won by just about 900 votes. Here's my political button was Schrader for Chabot, and that was the name of the college district at the time. And one of my goals, along with another woman named Alva Cooper, who ran with me as a team in that area, we intended to turn our community college branch campus into a full-fledged standalone community college. It took several years, but we were able to do that. I served on the board for 13 years. Very proud of that time. It took a lot of my life. Of course, evenings and extracurricular activities had to be curtailed so I could serve on that board. I served as president and secretary of the board. Just spent a lot of time lobbying in Sacramento. Got to know a lot of the Sacramento officials that way. And then later on, I got involved in some political campaigns. And my first big political involvement was when John B. Anderson from Rockford, Illinois, ran for president on the independent ticket in 1980. And I'd known him when I had my weeklies back here because he was representing our district and had met him a few times. So I took on his campaign out there. I was one of the team that ran his Northern California campaign. We didn't win anything, but we got about 10% of the vote. And we were very pleased at that. That was on the national basis. I then got involved in some congressional campaigns out there while I was working at Sandia. I guess the biggest one was Arnold Schwarzenegger. I joined his staff during his campaign for governor, and I never got paid for this. I was a volunteer photographer and wrote some news releases, got to know him pretty well. And of course, he won the election, so I could say that was one victory. I, meanwhile, had been very concerned about two other issues. One was mental health care, and another one was preserving vineyard lands, which was in the Bay Area fast going away with the development of the housing tracts around the East Bay. Mental health had been an issue that I had been concerned about way back in even actually when I lived in DeKalb, when they didn't have much mental health care. They only had one psychiatrist for DeKalb County, Dr. Bauer. And I became very interested in patient rights and in family issues about better service and treatment for mental health patients. So that carried throughout my life, campaigning as a patient advocate. I was the chairman of the Alameda County Valley Citizens for mental health care. When I came back here 10 years ago to retire in DeKalb, when we moved back from California, I immediately became interested in the healthcare status back here, applied for a position on the 708 Mental Health Board. It was not accepted. I think they were a little concerned about a carpetbagger from California coming back here and telling them how to run their business. But I've continued to be active in mental health matters. In fact, we formed a committee of Citizens for Better Mental Health Care in DeKalb County. This is a post-it we gave out 2 years ago when we were trying to bring mental health care back from out of the county to the local hospital. I haven't been successful, but we've raised awareness, and I think we've made a lot of progress in improving things, I hope, for the people of DeKalb County in mental health. Another issue out in California that I was very interested in is I started preserving the vineyards. We only had 3 wineries left in the Livermore area, and we ended up forming an organization called Friends of the Vineyards, and I was its first president, and we eventually built our organization up to 1,000 members, and that covered the entire East Bay. I'm proud to say that as a result of our organizing to preserve land and conserve agriculture acreage, we now have 5,000 acres in vineyards around the East Bay that we didn't have before when we started this back in the early 1980s. I can't take credit for all that because it took a lot of people working, lobbying, working with elected officials, and campaigning for preservation of the vineyards in that area. I think probably I should mention a little bit more about my family. I have now, of course, 2 grown sons, Todd and Darren, and my wife, Kay. As I said, she was responsible for their care and raising pretty much. Our son, Todd, graduated from, the tallest one in the picture here, graduated from DeVry Institute out in California. And our son, Darren, went through California Polytechnic University down in San Luis Obispo, known as Cal Poly. And he became a congressional staffer in Washington, D.C. as a result of his political science training, and has been there now 20 years in Washington, D.C., working for a Republican congressman. Our son, Todd, was in retail for 10 or 15 years of his life. Now he's working with his wife here in DeKalb, working for a company that sells health food products. And so we're very proud of this. The biggest disappointment I guess I have is that they didn't have any grandchildren. Our son Darren has devoted his life to work in D.C. and hasn't had not been married. Our son Todd married late in life, and so didn't give us any grandchildren. So that's the one thing I guess I would say was a setback. Anyway, to wrap up my story on my career, after 21 years at Sandia and getting involved in so many different community activities, grass always looks greener on the other side of the fence, and a large national laboratory, Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory across the street, had 10,000 employees as opposed to the 1,000 that we had at Sandia. And so I interviewed and was accepted for a position late in life when I was 60 years old at Lawrence Livermore Lab to direct their community affairs as a manager in the community affairs operation there. Then switched after 21 years, took early retirement from Sandia, went over to Lawrence Lab, where I had, it was not the best move in the world because my health had failed me. I had 2 forms of cancer. I went through a prostate cancer treatment and surgery, radiation, chemotherapy. I have fortunately it's in remission, and with the hormonal therapy treatments continue to function just fine. Then about 11 years ago, they discovered bladder cancer. And of course, that was when I was still working. It took a lot of my energy, sapped a lot of my strength. So I stepped down from my position in community relations and took a job as a historian and oral historian for Lawrence Livermore Lab. That was a very fortuitous move. I got to interview a lot of interesting scientists and leaders in the Department of Energy field, both in energy and in nuclear weapons. Some of the pioneers in the Manhattan Project and others who had been early, I guess you'd call them pioneers and scientists in the nation's defense program. So I did that the last 2 years of my career until I retired in 2006. But over the time that I did that, I learned a lot about interviewing people, even more than I had in the newspaper business. And so as a result, when I came back here, I had been involved in oral histories there professionally. I've done oral histories in DeKalb County and turned a lot of them over to the Joyner History Room, and still continue to do that to this day. I should mention my involvement in history. Preservation of historical landmarks and buildings was a big part of my life, as well as mental health advocacy. I helped organize a historical society in the town of Livermore. We saved a railroad depot that was going to be demolished. One of the setbacks we had, we were trying to save the boyhood home of Jack London, who was raised in the Livermore area on a farm. We thought we had the home saved, and a developer came in and got our demolition permit overnight, demolished Jack London's house over a weekend that we didn't know about, so we lost a major tourist attraction and historical landmark in our town. But we persevered in many other cases working in preservation. Something I'm very proud of that we accomplished was setting up something called a history mobile, where we bought an old RV, 27-foot RV, completely gutted the inside and turned it into a museum on wheels. This was done with a committee of about 6 of us through the Livermore Heritage Guild. And we had, I'd say, about 18 years of use out of that original history mobile, and we took that to hundreds and hundreds of school children throughout the district, showing them the history of the community and having docents work with them and driving that around. The other thing that we did out there was we preserved the Lincoln Highway garage, one of the original garages on the coast-to-coast Lincoln Highway that runs through DeKalb and runs through Livermore, California, into San Francisco, which was the terminus on the west coast. When I was president of the Livermore Heritage Guild, we renovated that garage and turned it into a museum, sort of a vehicle museum. It now has fire trucks. It has a complete part of a garage, an old garage from the early 1900s, and it's been a real successful effort in preserving part of the old Lincoln Highway, and is a stop for many tourists that come through, and there are many events held there. So that was just another one of the projects that I got involved in. And coming back here, I immediately joined the DeKalb County Historical Genealogical Society, plus the Kishwaukee Valley Heritage Society in Genoa, the Waterman Area Heritage Society, Sycamore Museum. It goes on, and I'm involved in some way in several historical societies. I've been on the board and vice president of the DeKalb County Historical Genealogical Society, and now I'm a landmarks chair. And we've been putting up some new plaques around the county designating certain historic sites. And the next one coming up is we're going to be dedicating 3 underground railroad plaques at significant sites in the county where church congregations such as United Presbyterian Church in Salmonock, the Mayfield Church north of Sycamore, and at the home of Congregational Church Deacon David West outside of Sycamore, will be marked soon with historical markers explaining their role as abolitionists and helping runaway slaves get to safety in Canada before the Civil War. So those are some of the outside activities I've gotten involved in, and it's been a very interesting life. Haven't always met with success in my historical preservation efforts or mental health and as an advocate, but I find that there are many things yet to do. I have been a newspaper columnist off and on most of my life. I wrote for 3 newspapers out in California as a columnist after I had stepped down from full-time work. I came back here in the Daily Chronicle, which I had been editor of from 69 to 1972. The editor said, "Sure, you've got something to offer. You lived here a long time. Write us do a history column." So I began a column in the Daily Chronicle in 2007, and off and on again. I quit sometimes and I come back, and the third time I'm back at it now as a columnist called DeKalb County Life. And as a result of that, I have a website set up with DeKalb County Life and an archive of all my past columns. In addition to that, I've written 2 books using some of my favorite columns. Back in 2010, I did the first edition of 100 of my favorite columns, Hybrid Corn and Purebred People. That sold out in a matter of weeks. So 4 years later, I decided to do a second edition with 100 more of my favorite columns. And so here's the second one that came out a little over a year ago. It has not been successful as the first one, but I guess it's an ego trip to self-publish your own columns. And if I ever get another couple hundred columns completed, I'll probably try a third book, whether they're profitable or not. Something else I've done over the years was involve myself in family genealogy. I wrote this 100-page book on the 4 branches of our Schrader, Price, Cooper, Stryker family. It goes back to the 1600s in one branch. I had a lot of fun doing that, traveled overseas. I went to the National Archives in Washington, D.C. But genealogy was a great way to learn about your family's past and in history in general, learning about my family's immigrating from Germany in the 1850s, coming over here on a boat to Ellis Island, and how they ended up in Illinois. My great-great-grandfather started out and moved to a German community or family, I guess, gathering of Germans in LaSalle County, moving up here to DeKalb County, buying one farm in Victor Township, down south of Waterman. Then got a second farm of only 80 acres for a while. The main Schrader farm was on Saddam Road. And then 3 generations later, my grandfather was still on that same farm. Sad story, during the Depression, they lost the farm to the bank. My father then, of course, had to go out as a tenant farmer, and that's where, when I was born, he was a tenant farmer on a dairy farm. But I'm very proud of the fact that I'm the 5th generation DeKalb County native, and our one son, Todd, who lives here, is the 6th generation in the family. I think a couple of other issues that I should talk about. One is the trying to save, along with Steve Biglin and some other historians in DeKalb area, the Annie Glidden house and Annie Glidden Road next to the Barcema Alumni Center. We worked on that project for over a year, hoping to save her home that she had spent 25, 30 years in farming that area. But unfortunately, the university had other plans for that house, and they basically told us it's going to be torn down. In fact, that was one of the pictures that I ran on the front page of the it's deceiving in that the picture shows that they tore the house down or were demolishing it. Actually, that was a Photoshop picture that I put in there to go along with some of the columns I'd written in my a book about the loss of a historic landmark in DeKalb. But you can't win them all. And over the years, I feel I've won more battles than I've lost, so I guess I come out ahead on the scale. Other than that, I just want to say that I've really enjoyed interacting with a lot of people in the 10 years I've been back here in DeKalb County. And, I should mention something. When I was editor of the Chronicle, we put out this, I just about forgot this special edition. This was the day that the first man stepped on the moon. And this is the front page. I actually put it together a day ahead of time, hoping that he would land on the moon, that their journey would be successful. So that was the front page that got nationwide attention because it went into different magazines, talking about one of the largest types. That typeface it's actually a big wooden type that I used for the headline. It's called a Second Coming type because it's so large when you put a story like that. I just had to mention that because I've done a lot of front pages in my life. That's the largest type I've ever used, and probably the most famous one. But anyways, I said I've made a lot of good friends here. Kay and I, living here at Oakcrest, have learned so much from many people who have spent their entire lives in DeKalb County, and I continue to really enjoy spending time not only interviewing people, but sharing their stories through oral histories. I do a lot of photography around the county, and as a way to sort of end my career, I'm back writing my column every Thursday in the Chronicle, and I have a blog site of my own now where I have had 4 other people join me. Steve Biglin, DeKalb historian, Doug Olson, former midweek columnist, Jesse Haish, and then a former farm editor from Jerry Smith's paper, Craig Rice. So we produce columns and opinion pieces and put it on a blog site, DeKalbCountyLife.com. And then it's called Barry's Blog is the button. Another project that something we do it as volunteers, not for pay, but I think it's a wonderful way to allow expression of people's opinions that otherwise might not get out to the public. Thank you very much for listening to my story. I look forward to producing a lot more copy for my Chronicle column as well as for my blog, and it's been a wonderful life.